His breath was right there, on my neck, close enough to blur the edges of my thoughts. Slow, warm, deliberate, like it had memorized me before it ever touched me. And honestly, it didn't even touch me. But I felt it anyway. That was the wildest part. I didn't flinch, didn't even turn. I just stood there, arms tense, lips parted, heart gone, while something inside me began to ache in a way I couldn't explain if I tried. And the craziest thing? It wasn't even Ray. Hey, before we get deeper, support this channel by hitting the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I want to know who's out there with me tonight. So yeah, back to the story. It was just a trip. A random night escape with the boys, packed into a borrowed minibus that smelled like too much cologne, fast food, and cheap ambition. We weren't chasing a destination, not really. We were running. From routine. From expectations. From whatever we didn't want to say out loud. Ray had the wheel. Liam was scrolling through a moody playlist. Miles had his head leaned back, headphones in, pretending he wasn't listening to everything. And me? I was the one staring out the window, pretending the passing lights could drown out the pull I'd been feeling since mile marker 23. You ever feel like you're being watched, but in a good way? Like you're being chosen, and they're just waiting for you to catch up? That's how it started. With a glance, then a whisper, and then a dare. What if? Ray said, his voice low, amused. We all said yes. It didn't sound like a joke. It didn't feel like a tease. And the way he looked at me, eyes unblinking, that lopsided smirk slipping, told me this wasn't about truth or consequences anymore. This was something else. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because my breath had caught in my throat, and my body was humming in that quiet, dangerous way. The way it hums when something's about to begin, or break. But then Liam looked up, and for the first time in hours, his gaze wasn't distant or half-lidded. It was sharp, focused, waiting. He didn't say a word. He just reached out slowly, casually, and rested his hand near mine. Close, but not touching. Yet somehow, it felt louder than anything I'd heard all night. There's something about silence that amplifies everything. The road outside was still stretching. The hum of tires on asphalt was steady. But inside that bus, the air had changed. And when Liam's fingers finally grazed the outside of my thigh, I didn't move. Not away. Not toward him either. I just froze. Because the way he did it, soft, curious, with a patience that felt like reverence, it was nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't rushed or careless. It was poetry disguised as touch. And then, there was another hand, from behind, barely brushing my arm, like a question asked in a language I didn't even know I spoke. It was Miles. Still quiet, still calm, but suddenly devastatingly present. He leaned in close enough that his lips almost grazed the edge of my ear, and whispered something I'll never forget. I knew you'd feel like this, and my whole body betrayed me. I didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't push him away. But the way my knees weakened? Yeah, that was my reply. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Not with them. Not in a moving bus at 80 kilometers per hour. Not in the dark, beneath a broken ceiling light and faded leather seats. But the way they moved around me, the way they didn't rush, didn't pressure, just surrounded? God, it felt like falling into a dream I didn't know I'd already had. Ray hadn't moved. Not since he said it. He was still watching, but not with the fire I expected. It was something else. His eyes darted from Liam's fingers tracing slow patterns on my leg, to Miles' hand resting lightly on my hip like it belonged there. And something in Ray's expression didn't feel right. Was it a surprise? Jealousy? Regret? To be very honest, I couldn't tell. All I knew was he wasn't in control anymore. And that realization? It hit like lightning. Because for the first time since this all started, I saw the truth. Ray may have sparked it, But Liam and Miles had been waiting. Not for the dare. Not for permission. But for me. Have you ever felt that? That moment where you're not just wanted, but known? Where someone's touch doesn't ask to own you, but to remember you. Because that's what this was. Their fingers weren't roaming. They were reading. And my skin, it answered them. One shiver at a time. The bus kept moving. Streetlights painted gold across the windows, flashing like a heartbeat. And all I could do was let go. Of fear. Of hesitation. Of pretending I didn't want to know how far they were willing to go for me. I felt a breath against my collarbone. Soft. Warm. Steady. Like they were learning the shape of me just by being near. And still no one said a word. There was no need. Because what was happening wasn't a conversation. It was a confession. Ray finally moved. He stood up slowly, then backed into the farthest seat without a single word. And in his silence, I heard everything. He wasn't ready. Not for this. Not for what he'd started. Not for the part where I stopped being his fantasy and became theirs. And me? I should have pulled back. I should have laughed it off. Made a joke. Said I was tired. Claimed I misread the room. But instead, I closed my eyes. Let the music fade. Let their hands speak. Let the road carry me forward. Because for the first time in a long, long time, I felt seen and wanted. Not for what I looked like, but for how I felt in their hands. The music had stopped. I didn't notice when. Maybe it was somewhere between the second touch and the first breath I stopped pretending I could resist. And yet, there we were, still in motion. The road stretched like a promise, wide and endless. And me? I was still trying to catch up with everything I'd just felt. My body was humming, like it had heard something. My mind hadn't quite translated yet. But it wasn't confusion. It was clarity. And maybe that's what scared me most. Miles hadn't moved. His hand was still where he left it, low, firm, reverent. His thumb traced tiny, slow arcs across the thin fabric of my shirt, just enough to make me forget what air felt like without him. And Liam, he leaned forward, rested his forehead gently against mine, and whispered, "You okay?" Not in a worried way, but like he already knew the answer. Like he just wanted to hear me say it. So I nodded, not because I had words, but because I didn't want to lose the moment by overthinking it. We weren't talking. We were listening. To breathe. To silence. To that invisible frequency, why people only tune into when they finally stop pretending. And it was loud. God, it was loud. The van rolled on, its rhythm matching the heartbeat in my throat. Streetlight after streetlight, each flash washing over us like little jolts of gold. Ray was still in the back, unmoving, unreadable. And I wasn't sure if he was regretting the dare or realizing he'd lit a match he couldn't blow out. He stared out the window, but I could feel his gaze flickering over us. He didn't own the moment anymore. And that, it changed everything. Have you ever felt like your skin is holding a secret? Because mine was. And they were reading it, word by word. Liam's touch drifted upward, barely grazing the side of my neck. Slowly. Carefully, like almost rehearsed. Like he was afraid the moment would vanish if he rushed. And Miles? He shifted closer, lips brushing just beneath my jaw, so soft it didn't feel real. I breathed in, held it, let the feeling settle like heat in my bones. They didn't ask for permission. Not in the usual way. They asked with patience, with space, with the kind of silence that waits, not demands. And I answered the only way I knew how. By leaning in. By not pulling away. By letting my head rest back. Just enough to say keep going. The windows fogged a little. No one noticed. Or maybe no one cared. Outside, the world was still rushing past. But inside, time folded in on itself. Their hands, they weren't just touches anymore. They were maps. Tracing places I hadn't let anyone near in years. Not because I didn't want to, but because no one had ever asked. Not like this. Ray cleared his throat. It was small, barely audible, but it sliced through the silence like glass. I turned, eyes meeting his in the rearview mirror. And for a moment, neither of us blinked. There was something in his gaze I hadn't seen before. Regret? Jealousy? Longing? Or maybe it was something else entirely. Fear. Not of me. Not of them. But of being left behind by the very fantasy he created. I looked away, because I couldn't hold his stare without remembering the way he used to touch me, like I was his to ruin. But this? What was happening now? This wasn't ruined. This was rebuilding. Slow. Soft. Brick by breathless brick. Liam whispered, "You want us to stop?" His voice was like velvet dipped in hesitation. And I didn't even let him finish. I shook my head. Not because I was sure, but because I wasn't, and that uncertainty felt like the most honest thing I'd said in years. And then he smiled. Small. Crooked. Devastating. "I didn't think so," he said, voice low, almost apologetic. And with that, his lips finally touched mine. Not in a rush. Not in a claim. But like a secret. One I didn't know I'd been holding. I melted. Right there, seatbelt digging into my side. Knees curled beneath me like I was trying to disappear into the moment. And Miles? He kissed the hollow of my throat. A whisper of skin on skin that felt like thunder. I didn't moan. Didn't sigh. I just exhaled. Like I'd been holding that breath since the moment Ray whispered, "What if?" Because this wasn't a what if anymore. This was now. This was real. This was me, soft, open, trembling, not because I was weak, but because I was finally being seen. The van slowed. Ray pulled off at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. No lights. Just the hum of the engine and the thrum of blood behind my ears. Liam helped me sit up. Miles kissed my shoulder once, like a promise he'd return. And they stepped out. Ray stayed behind. "You mad?" I asked him softly. He didn't answer right away. But when he finally spoke, his voice was cracked glass. "No. Just wasn't expecting to lose you like that." I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the guy who always had control. I saw a boy who just realized he couldn't rewind. And me? I wasn't sure what I felt. Guilt? Yeah, a little. But more than that, freedom. Because for once, I wasn't someone's backup plan. I was the main story. We didn't speak as we pulled back onto the road. Just the sound of the engine humming again, steady and low, like it knew something had shifted. Because it had. Whatever this was, this shock, this heat, this quiet unraveling, wasn't going to stay neatly zipped between exits. It was spilling. All over me. And I wasn't cleaning it up. I kept my head down, half leaned against the fogged window, half lost in my own skin. Because even with the cool glass pressed to my cheek, I was burning. Still tingling in the places they'd touched. Still aching in the spaces they hadn't yet. And they knew it. I knew they knew it. Miles sat beside me this time. Liam is in front. No words. Just presence. The kind that speaks louder than sound. And when Miles reached for my hand, threading his fingers through mine like it was the most natural thing in the world, I didn't think. I just let him. You ever feel like someone's holding you together just by touching you? Because that's what it felt like. Like maybe I was coming apart a little, but somehow in the safest way. We drove for what felt like hours. I wasn't sure where we were going. Didn't ask. Because when you're wrapped in something this consuming, the where doesn't matter anymore. Only the who. Only the how. Only the way he pulled the blanket over me without asking, and the way Liam turned the music low, just enough to let the quiet stay soft. And just when I thought the night had stilled, it happened. Liam turned in his seat. Faced me. His eyes were softer now. Not guarded. Not teasing. Just wide open. You're not scared. His voice cracked a little at the edges. And I shook my head, slower this time. More sure. I was, I whispered. But not anymore. Then he climbed over the seat. And before I could ask, before I could even breathe the question, he kissed me again. But different this time. Slower. Deeper. Like he was trying to remember me. And when Miles shifted closer, lips brushing my shoulder again, I didn't flinch. I opened. It wasn't frenzy. It wasn't chaos. It was deliberate. Every glance. Every fingertip. Every shared breath. They weren't just touching me. They were asking me to feel. And I did. God, I did. They both leaned in, one from the left, one from the right. And me? I was in the middle of something I couldn't name, but never wanted to end. My breath hitched. Not out of fear, but because I finally understood what it meant to be unraveled, with care. My hands moved without thinking, one in Liam's shirt, the other buried in Miles' sleeve. They responded like they'd been waiting for that. And maybe they had. Maybe this moment was always just waiting for me to arrive. Ray watched from the mirror. He didn't speak. Didn't blink. Just stared. And when our eyes met again, he looked away very fast. And I let him. Because I wasn't his anymore. And maybe I never really was. His silence was the loudest thing in the van. Ray hadn't said a word since he pulled into that dark, forgotten gas station. And maybe that was the part that ached the most. He wasn't angry. He was just gone. Somewhere else. Watching but not seeing. Present but only just. And I guess, maybe that's how it always was. The warmth from Miles' touch still lingered on my thigh. Liam's scent, clean, worn cotton, and something just barely sweet, clung to my skin like memory. And even in the hush between headlights and heartbeat, something inside me pulsed with a new kind of knowing. But Ray? He never moved. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe too loud. Just like when someone wants to say something but just can't. It sat on his shoulders, the way they dipped forward. It spilled from his eyes, brimming with a fire he refused to let burn. And even with their fingers still tangled with mine, my chest ached. Not because I missed him, but because I finally saw him for what he was. A boy who only wanted me when he thought no one else could have me. "We should stop soon," Liam murmured. His voice was low, almost too low, like he didn't want to break whatever spell had draped itself over the van. "An hour," Ray said suddenly. Still not looking. It surprised all of us. And me? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know if I was supposed to say thank you. Or why now? We pulled into a roadside inn. A tiny thing tucked behind tall pines and half-lit signs. Everything about it looked temporary. Forgotten. But inside, it was warm. Old floral curtains. Carpet that had seen better days. And 2 rooms. Only 2. Ray tossed one key to Liam without a glance. Kept the other for himself. And when he walked off, I watched his back, stiff and tired. And for a second, I thought I'd follow him. Ask. Explain. Apologize, maybe. But then Miles touched my waist. Just softly. A reminder. And that moment passed like vapor. Inside our room, the heat was stifling. Or maybe that was just me. I stood near the edge of the bed, nervous laughter bubbling up from nowhere. "You okay?" Liam asked. That question again. God, why did it make me feel seen every time? "I think so," I whispered. And that was enough. They didn't push. Didn't crowd. They waited close but still. Like they knew I needed to find my way back to them, gently. And I did. Step by step. Heart first. Miles pulled me close. Liam kissed the back of my hand. And then, without warning, I cried. Not loud. Not messy. Just quiet tears. The kind that sneak out when you've finally stopped holding everything in. They didn't panic. Didn't retreat. They held me, arms around my waist, breath on my skin, love in their silence. I'd never been broken like this. And I'd never been held through it either. It wasn't about fixing. It was about staying. And they stayed. The room dimmed as night thickened. I found myself curled between them, bare feet tangled in warm sheets, laughter humming softly under my ribs. Miles whispered something about the stars. Liam brushed my hair back and murmured, "This feels like home." And for the first time in a long time, I believed someone when they said that. But even peace has its ghosts. Because in the other room, Ray was still alone. And part of me, a small aching part, still wondered if he wanted it that way. The morning hit slow, like it didn't want to interrupt the softness we'd wrapped ourselves in overnight. Birds outside, coffee in the air, and Miles' arms still resting heavy around my waist, like even in sleep, he didn't want to let go. Liam was already awake, staring out the window, shirtless, sunlight casting gold over his shoulders. He looked back at me and smiled, small, sleepy, real. I smiled back, not because I was trying, but because it just happened. And that's when I knew. I wasn't broken anymore. Maybe bruised. Maybe cracked in a few forgotten corners. But I wasn't shattered. We dressed slow. Took our time. Because nothing about this felt rushed anymore. Miles pulled my hoodie over my head, hands brushing down my arms like the fabric was sacred. And when Liam laced my boots, it didn't feel like a favor. It felt like devotion. Outside, the morning was crisp. Ray stood near the van. Same stance. Same look. Except he looked right at me this time. Not through me. At me. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice low, rough like gravel. I nodded. Not because I owed him, but because part of healing is sometimes just hearing the wound out loud. We walked to the side of the lot, near the pine trees. Quiet. Still. He shoved his hands in his pockets and sighed. "You hate me?" I blinked. Caught off guard. "No." And I didn't. Not even close. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he said. I laughed softly. Not out of spite. Just understanding. No one ever does. He looked at me, eyes glassy. "Do you love them?" That hit different. Because he didn't ask if I wanted them. He asked if I loved them. And I knew the answer. But I wasn't ready to say it out loud. So instead, I asked, "Would it change anything?" He looked away. "That's what I thought," I whispered. We stood in silence. Wind in the trees. Birdsong. Then he reached for my hand. But I didn't give it. I just stepped back. Softly. Slowly. Kindly. Because love doesn't always end in fire. Sometimes it ends in a whisper. And this was me saying goodbye. To control. To confusion. To conditional love dressed up as loyalty. I walked back toward the van. Liam met my eyes. Miles opened the door. And when I climbed in, I wasn't the same girl who started that road trip. I was someone who'd been broken open and filled with something softer. Something real. We pulled out onto the road. Music playing. The wind through cracked windows. 3 of us. No more secrets. No more games. Just truth. And when Miles squeezed my thigh once gently, and Liam kissed the back of my hand without saying a word, I finally breathed the kind of breath that felt like mine. So no, I wasn't just someone's fantasy anymore. I was reality, and I was finally living in it. Have you ever loved someone, only to realize they were just the lesson, not the destination? Share your thoughts in the comment section. And hey, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and subscribe to this channel for more daily stories that hit exactly where it matters.